Hello, everyone. I'm Ben Reed. I'm going to talk about modern JavaScript in OPENNMS. I have been working with OPENNMS pretty much since the beginning for 3 different companies. I was the first technical hire after the proof of concept Bluebird turned into an actual product, OPENNMS, with a real company behind it. You can reach me at ranger@opennms.org, or I'm Ranger Rick on Twitter. I tweet too much, so you probably don't want to follow me. But I'm also in the OPENNMS chat, and I'm in there all day. So, well, not all day in Germany, but all day back home. So you can reach me there too. So in the beginning of OPENNMS, JavaScript was really mostly not JavaScript. Almost everything was JSPs and Java and servlets. There was basically the majority of business logic lived in the JSPs and the Java code. We did a little bit of JavaScript for validation and things like that, but essentially we hadn't used JavaScript for the majority of the development of the OPENNMS web UI. Then JavaScript integration started happening. We started writing apps in Angular and things like that. And it looked a little like this. This is better, I guess. 7 million script lines included in a JSP. And then way down at the bottom is like, ooh, there's a couple of divs that turn into the actual Angular app. So it's kind of crazy. So finally, more recently, I worked on revamping all of our JavaScript build so that it's in one place and has a tool for loading all these JavaScript assets. So now this is the exact same thing that previous code did with all those script lines. All you have to do is say, I want to load this one asset. It's called requisitions. That's the name of the Angular app. And it does all the work of pulling in whatever resources it needs. What this actually does is magic. No, wait, web assets. So web assets is a new thing that I made that is essentially part of a single JavaScript build for all of our JavaScript and CSS and whatever assets that we use throughout the web UI. An asset is something that is compiled with WEBPACK. Can be CSS, JavaScript, ES6, TypeScript, Sass. Like we can support pretty much any of the major tools used by the JavaScript development world. It will pick out things like style sheets and JavaScript scripts and all that kind of stuff. It can build production or development versions or both. Behind that, on the Java side, there is a thing called an asset locator. You can use that to ask for all of the resources associated with a particular project. But most of the time, you will probably be accessing assets through JSPs, like that previous example. What this actually turns into on the script side is that. So you'll see it loads requisitions.min.js. It adds a timestamp to make browser caching saner. And you can load CSS things and tell it that you only want it to have media type of screen and all that fun stuff. So anything that you can do as far as loading resources should be supported by the load assets JSP include. So like in this case, that turns into a style sheet link that opens the theme with a timestamp and sets it to media equals screen. There are a number of parameters you can set. The asset, obviously, is the asset's name. The type of the asset, a media property for style links, whether you want scripts to defer or be async, which mostly we don't want to use in our UI just because of the way things load, but there might be cases where you want to use the newer asynchronous model for loading scripts. And also, like I showed before, by default it's making this min.js link. That's what you get when you go to a page. These are all the assets that are loaded when you go to the login JSP. But if you add minified equals false to the end, you can get the non-minified versions of those assets. So if you're needing to debug something, if you want to know why something isn't working, or you just want to look at the source code, you can see the original versions of the JavaScript. And it's a lot easier to kind of debug things as you're working on JavaScript code. So the build system. The build system is by default integrated with Maven. Anything that's built in the assets is triggered automatically just through the normal OpenNMS compile. You have probably seen it because it takes a little while. It takes a while to build a whole bunch of JavaScript stuff. And right now, we still have a lot of things that are kind of all over the place. So long term, the goal is to consolidate a lot of that, and the build will get faster. And also, the build tools have been getting faster. I've updated the Webpack we use for some of our build stuff and shaved like 30 seconds off the build time. So as the tools get better, this will get faster as well. So you can build development or release versions. You can watch the code and have it automatically rebuild your assets as you're working on code. There's a linter that will check for errors or formatting issues. And then, of course, there are unit tests. The build system is based on WEBPACK and BABEL. WEBPACK is a bundler in JavaScript parlance. It's essentially a tool that does all the work of figuring out how to split up your resources, names them unique things so they can be re-downloaded safely, all that fun stuff. And BABEL is a transpiler. It is a tool that was made to ease development in the JavaScript world because things are moving so fast. You want to use all the new things that have made working with JavaScript easier, be that working with TypeScript instead of JavaScript or using newer JavaScript features. And BABEL does a good job of making your code backwards compatible. And we're actually using a backwards compatibility shim in BABEL that essentially says, always support the last 2 major browser versions, always support at least Safari 7 so that we work on like Android 4 and up and older iOS versions. And any browser with greater than 5% real world usage, so it covers things that maybe we didn't get through the other queries. And this uses caniuse.com's data for browser statistics, so it's always kept up to date with essentially how people are using JavaScript in the real world. And BABEL is also set up to automatically convert AngularJS dependency injection into the format that makes it safer to use in the browser because there can often be conflicts in variable names and things like that. So you don't have to write the funky bracketed version on the right there. You can just put your Angular variables in your function, and it will do all the work of making it safe to use in the real world. And then ultimately what it spits out is a UMD JavaScript module, which is Universal Module Definition, I believe, which means that you can use that resultant JavaScript file in a browser or require it in Node.js or anything else that interacts with pretty much any kind of JavaScript module. So if you want to create an asset, assets live in the core web assets directory. When I did this, I spent a lot of time trying to make it easy for people to add new things to it without having to do a lot of infrastructure work. So I've documented a lot of what I talk about in this talk in a README file that's in that directory. You can do Sass or pure CSS, TypeScript, JavaScript ES6 modules, Node modules, and then there are 5 major types of assets. There's fonts, there's images, there's a JS folder that's for older Node.js style JavaScript that uses require to pull in its dependencies. And then there's a modules directory for doing newer style ES6 JavaScript or TypeScript that uses import to create or to pull in dependencies. And then, as I said, there's a style folder for either pure CSS or if you want to use Sass to compile to CSS. And then inside each of the JS and modules directories, there are 4 different types of folders. There's app, that is for essentially a Node.js style directory structure where you have an index file in it, and that can optionally require all kinds of other assets. our Webpack setup will automatically look at the directory name of the project in app and create an asset named after that directory name. So if you decide to call your project foo, you only have to put name equals foo in that JSP include resources later, and it will know how to find it. There's a Vaadin directory. Vaadin is very picky in how it loads its resources, and it's got a kind of weird initialization. So I had to kind of work around Vaadin in the new JavaScript code, and to do that, I essentially have these scripts that are sort of roll-up scripts that pull in everything that's needed to initialize the Vaadin, a particular Vaadin app, and then it turns that into one gigantic JavaScript file that loads all at once, because if you try to do it asynchronously, Vaadin blows up. I spent a long time getting all the resources loading properly in Vaadin. Newer versions of Webpack actually kind of handle asynchronous dependencies better, so I might revisit that. I might be able to get rid of that component in an upcoming release, but that needs more investigation. Then there's also a vendor directory. This is a place where I've essentially made, like in our UI, we use jQuery, but we also use a number of jQuery plugins that are third-party. We also use Angular, and we use a couple of different Angular third-party plugins. I've made essentially simple roll-up scripts that you can use to include a single thing and have that dependency available to your scripts in a convenient manner. So there's just a single vendor Angular.js script you need to include into your project to know that all of our Angular infrastructure is ready for your app. And there's a number of different things in there besides just those. And then lib is kind of for everything else. Lib is meant to be pulled in as there's utility scripts, there's third-party stuff that's in lib that can't be pulled in through Node.js for whatever reason. We depend on a few kind of old things that don't play well in the Node environment that I will essentially statically require from the lib directory. Mostly lib exists to work around various issues I ran into while working on making this single monolithic JavaScript build. So if you want to create an asset, you can do a few things to make the dev environment a little easier. First, you build OPENNMS. Then you can go and essentially delete the assets directory from your running OPENNMS install and symlink it into the target dists assets directory in the web assets build. And then you can set a few properties like that minified equals false makes it so that by default, while you're developing, it will always serve the non-minified versions. And also by default, the asset locator Java API refreshes itself every 5 minutes to see if assets have changed on disk. This makes it happen every 1 minute instead, so it makes it easier to kind of not have to reload all of OPENNMS to work on JavaScript stuff. You can just continually rebuild in your assets directory, and within a minute, they will show up in the web UI. So let's try that. I'm going to switch over to my environment here. I made a little script. So let's see. So I'm going to make a new project called hello in the assets directory. So this is just the simplest Angular app you can think of. All it is a hello world that creates a directive called hello. So this directive in Angular parlance is making a custom HTML tag. So you'll be able to just put an HTML tag that says hello, and it'll say hello world instead. And then I am going to make a hello JSP so I don't have to mess with the rest of the real web UI. And a simple bootstrap JSP. So what this does is it's a JSP file. It includes the bootstrap, which is how you make all the header menu junk in OPENNMS. And then it loads the hello asset. It has a hello tag inside H1, so it's nice and big, and then the footers. So if I save that, And then in theory, oh, wait, I have to build. So now you go into the core web assets directory and you can do yarn build. That will do the development version of the build, so it won't make minified resources, but I've configured OpenNMS not to use the minified. And if you look back here, it says JavaScript entry points. It automatically detected that new hello directory. And the build takes like 20, 30 seconds. It's not too bad when it's not in production mode. It seems much longer when doing a presentation. There we go. No, it's building everything. So that's all of the JavaScript assets. So they get turned into essentially a directory full of stuff. So I can show you here, target dist assets. So all that stuff was generated by that build. All the CSS files, all our various JavaScript we use in different places. And so now if I go over here, I log in. I don't need to unlock one password, thank you. Of course, it's nice and slow when we're doing a demo. Well, that's a good sign. Let's try going to the JSP. All right, well, so maybe my OpenNMS isn't happy. I guess Jesse and I are both destined to have OpenNMSs that need restarting. So we get to wait a minute.
Just says performance anxiety.
Trying to stop, but it's already stopped. I disagree. I think that's right. We'll see what autocomplete or tab completion does after it returns. There we go. Presenter's secret. This is how you pad a presentation. All right, so here we go. Starting up. Everyone's favorite Eventy takes a little while. Takes a long while. All right, I think something is wrong. Of course, this worked perfectly when I tried it out this morning. No, I'm not seeing any errors. Why is it taking so long? All right. Well, I guess while we wait for that, maybe I'll show the other example, and we'll do them both at once. So the other thing I was going to do after showing that first hello world is a second hello world that is the same thing but done on the TypeScript and ES6 module side. So the way that works is basically the same, except it's instead of being in the JS directory, it's now in the modules directory. Okay, so OpenNMS is just completely not happy. Demos. Oh no, it seems to be starting up now though, so let's see. Hey, okay. There we go. So hello world. So that was, if we go down here, you can see in the actual HTML, it's still the hello tag. That other stuff got turned into a script source equals hello.js. So that is doing what it's supposed to. So now let's go back to making a TypeScript version. And this will look remarkably similar to the regular JavaScript version. The main difference is we're using imports Since we're importing just a plain JavaScript module, you have to do the import star as Angular instead of being able to import individual chunks of a module. If you're loading something from the module side, you can choose how much of it to use, and WEBPACK can actually be smart about eliminating code that's never used. So I'm making an Angular module this time called HelloTS that does essentially the same thing. I'll go and do my compile again. And then while that's happening, I'll edit the hello.jsp to add the new bit. So this time we're loading the HelloTS asset, and then we have a HelloTS tag. It's very exciting. This is very nice UI work. So now if we come back to our hello, assuming the asset locator has refreshed, which it hasn't. It'll take just a minute before that shows up. And OpenNMS failed again. So there must be something funny going on in Jetty with this reloading. So hey, we found a bug. This is what happens when you run snapshot branch stuff. Let's see if it'll find it. There we go. So hello world, hello TypeScript. You can see it's basically doing the same thing. The only difference is the modules were made in a different manner. So you're basically free to write JavaScript or TypeScript or whatever you like, and it will do the right thing. It will put all the assets where they're reachable from the JSPs. So let's go back to this. So going forward, another aspect of using JavaScript and OPENNMS is we have a separate project that's called OPENNMS.JS. It is a single JavaScript, mostly TypeScript code base that is designed for interacting with OPENNMS REST's APIs. It actually works with basically any OPENNMS version that has REST, all the way back to 1.8. Obviously, some features are only available in newer OPENNMSs. Most of the APIs in OPENNMS.js are version aware, so it will incrementally support newer features of OPENNMS as we add features to OPENNMS.js. And if you try to use something that doesn't exist, it'll throw an exception saying you can't use this on this version and all that kind of stuff. But and there's tools for asking OPENNMS.js and the remote server, what features it has. All the API docs are written using TypeDoc. There's actually a portion of OPENNMS.js's build that will die if you do not have documentation for new things that you write in OPENNMS.js, so it should be at least reasonably self-documenting as far as how to use it. There's also a command line tool. So you can interact with OPENNMS, kind of a more generic version of what provision PL is, which currently OPENNMS.js does not do provisioning, but that's a thing I want to add to the CLI tool, so it can eventually replace provision PL. The API is pretty simple if you want to do basic things. Like literally, if you just want to connect and get some server data, you only need to import the client. Yes. No, actually, this is just newer JavaScript, ES6 JavaScript.
JavaScript?
Mm-hmm.
And why use import and not require?
So import is a new feature of JavaScript ES6 and higher. So it basically require was a Node.js thing that was essentially their own thing, and is the import is essentially the JavaScript folks' answer to that, and essentially it's the standard for pulling in resources through JavaScript. So here you can basically create a client object, connect to demo, and then you can list the client's capabilities. And then here is if you install the OPENNMS command line tool through npm, this is doing the same thing. You can connect to demo. It will save your login information, although it does it in clear text. I haven't implemented like a nice little encryption thingy for on disk yet, so be be careful that you're not giving away secrets in your home directory. But then you can run the OpenNMS tool and ask the server what its capabilities are, and it'll say, oh, this version supports hacking alarms, it supports REST API version 2, it supports graphs and outage summaries and things like that. OpenNMS.JS is already integrated in Helm. In fact, OpenNMS.JS has a modular API for talking REST. So when it's used in Helm, we actually have an adapter that is able to talk through Grafana's Angular HTTP adapter instead of doing its own REST calls. When you use the command line version, it uses a REST API called Axios that's really nice. It supports the measurements API, it supports flows, it supports correlation queries. So OpenNMS.JS can basically do a lot of the modern stuff that's feeding into Helm. Now, obviously, right now, Helm is basically the only thing using it. But in the future, I want to port Compass back to OpenNMS.JS. OpenNMS.JS was essentially written as kind of a way to put down all the things I learned while making Compass. Compass is written in JavaScript and contains kind of a nascent version of what OpenNMS.JS does. But OpenNMS.JS is much cleaner. And then obviously, long term, the idea is to make OpenNMS.JS the way that we interact with the OpenNMS UI in general, so that we have one unified UI API that is able to pull REST data from the back end. Presumably long term, we would want to have a single page app and all that kind of stuff, but that's clearly way down the road. And last, I guess, does anyone have any questions? Sure.
I tried to use Angular, not Angular.js, but Angular.
Or like Angular 2 and up.
Remember?
Yeah.
And I was not able to let OpenNMS.js be used in Angular, also using the TypeScript. And the problem was that we had that kind of, remember? It's hard for me.
Okay.
It's a long time ago. If you remember, it was
yeah.
We discussed about these details, and the question is if you know that the problem I had have been in some sense resolved. So if you know that OpenNMS.js has been used with Angular, latest Angular.
So the question for the audience is OpenNMS.js compatible with Angular, i.e. Angular 2 and up? Yeah. It should be. I can't remember the specific problem you were having, but I know that I have updated some of the TypeScript support stuff that I've done since you did that a little bit, like not a lot. The main thing you'd run into in Angular 2 and up is we would need to write an Angular adapter that uses Angular 2's REST APIs, which are different than Angular 1. So like, alternatively, you could let it still continue to use Axios and do direct REST calls, but if you want to live in the rest of the Angular ecosystem, we'd need to make an HTTP adapter. But as far as the specific problems you were having, it was something weird with TypeScript compilation.
To the fact that it was not finding a primitive of JavaScript.
Yeah. And one alternative to that would be to use it as JavaScript and don't try to import the TypeScript files. If ultimately in the end you should still be able to use it as a plain JavaScript object because it compiles down to regular JavaScript. So that's one option, is to use that instead.
Thank you.
Anyone else? No? David? Question is, can we use OpenNMS.js to reduce the complexity in the UI? We could, but I think that's kind of orthogonal to OpenNMS.js itself. I mean, it does make it easier to get structured data. Like, one of the things that I worked on in OpenNMS.js was trying to normalize our model a little bit, because our model objects are kind of weird and have changed to some extent over time. So there's sort of like a platonic ideal of an alarm object and things like that in OPENNMS.JS versus what you get as straight JSON from the OpenNMS backend. So that does reduce a little of that complexity, but most of our UI complexity is of our own making.
I guess I was kind of referring to configuration stuff.
Yes, yeah, like, because there is a config REST UI that lets us get at a lot of things, and long term, I think it would be useful to make something that's able to interact with those, even if we haven't yet made unique editors for different types of things like we have for the provisioning UI. Right. It'd be nice to have a kind of generic config editor that's able to deal with our structured objects and at least do something, you know, in a nice table or, you know, that kind of stuff. You know, that is one of the things I've thought about doing.
You were able to capture all that right there in OpenNMS.JS. You could do it from command line or from...
Right, right. That's the idea anyways. So, anyone else? No? All right, thank you.